Well, thank you very much for this interesting talk. I have some questions, but I don't want to take the questions away from the audience. So I'm asking the audience if you have any questions.
Yeah. How many letters did you analyze? And did you get all of them, or are some missing?
So there were about 250 in total, from 50 to 47 BC, and just that time frame. Nothing, because as I said before, I think you weren't here. It's okay. They don't get, the Civil War doesn't get discussed until 50 BC in the letters, and then it dies off after 47. So there's no mention before and after that. So there was no point in reading. Well, I read the letters, obviously, but there was no point in including them in the study. Okay.
Another question. I'm no historian, so, or the first question. So every letter is to or from Cicero.
Yes.
So I wondered, why did you put higher weight on those connections instead of doing it the other way around? Because I would have decreased the weight for all direct connections between addressee and sender. In order to get the small lines that connect everything else besides Cicero that's the interesting stuff, right?
Yeah. So the really small lines that you see there, they're not letters that have been received or written to people.
Yeah,
they're people that have been just discussed in the letters.
But those, I would imagine, are the more interesting ones, because of course, my intuition would be that, of course, if you write a letter to someone, you mention him quite often, like how are you doing and so on. But if you want to analyze the network, then I would put a high emphasis on everybody else that's mentioned, in order. So you kind of.
So if I did that, we would have basically the inverse of it. So, the green arrow leading to Caesar, for example, would be really small.
Yeah.
But then you'd have a really small one. So I can't read what that says. So this one here, for example, is. Oh, I can't see that because it's too blurry. I think that's Piso. So that would be. In 50 to 47 BC, he has a really small line. He's probably only mentioned once in those 4 years.
And he's mentioned
by Cicero, but he's a neutral.
It's not written to. I mean, I'm sorry, maybe I don't get the image quite right, but so all lines going to the center are direct connections between Cicero and somebody else?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So and then you see all the ones. So you see these ones, for example, which come out. And yes, I understand what maybe these should be bigger. Is that what you're saying? The ones that connect other people than just Cicero. Yes, I could have done that. So attributed more weight, for example, to Rufus writing to. I don't know what that says. It starts with a C, but I can't read it. This is too blurry. Right. So yes, I could have assigned more weight to that. Definitely.
Yeah, so because I thought you had you had one slide where you showed the weights.
Yep. So this one.
I would try to do it the other way around. Every direct connection is like one a quarter or.
It's behind that.
I'm looking for a zoom. I thought I've seen a zoom before.
Yes, maybe that's something for, if I decided to make this, because it's a great project, and this was, I didn't spend a lot of time on it. And it's not really, it was more to see whether social network analysis could be used for my bigger project, which is my PhD. If I decided to take this any further, then yes, I would probably look at more of those connections between individuals rather than just Cicero. Yeah. And yes, I do agree that those are very important. But for the case of this one, what I really wanted to do was create a network based on Cicero rather than the people between Cicero's network. So rather than the people and that Cicero talks about and how those people connect with each other. That would be a different project, I think. But you're right, it's a very interesting one. And yes, I would attribute more points to that because they are connected to each other than just through Cicero. Yeah, so I get your point. But and it is very interesting that those people are connected to each other and not just to Cicero.
Yeah, I mean, you could try to kind of get some information about maybe what that other person may be thinking.
Yeah.
So, like,
But again, it's all. What you also have to take into account is that all of these letters were published very soon after his death, and all of them were probably edited in some way. So, I mean, Cicero comes off as this amazing person. He whines a lot, but he comes across as this really amazing person and makes sure that everything he does in the end works out. And whether that's actually what he said in his letters originally is a little bit different. And whether, especially with the Civil War, and there are so many things that happened, whether the letters were edited to make sure that certain people who backed or said the wrong thing about Caesar, those might have been taken out because they didn't want to be decapitated or whatever. So that's one aspect of letters that you have to take note of, is the fact that are they really a proper representation of what happened? But yeah, I get your point, that the connections between those people is very important. Yeah.
Yes, I tend to agree with this, with Simon, that the network somehow exaggerates the arrows that go from to Cicero, but and that the other lines are actually surprisingly thin. But my question is actually, so you want to distinguish, or you want to find out whether the decision to be in this camp, on this camp, is social or political or for family reasons. I didn't understand how your network is actually able to give you this information. So the examples that you gave with this guy changing the camp or so sounded to me more like you have actually read the letter and analyzed it, but it's not in the network.
Well, that's what I said. It's really difficult to use network analysis for that. And yes, you're right. I know that because I've read it. But if we look at, what's this one? That's 50 BC. And the main person that I talked about was Callius Rufus, and he's green because he supports Caesar. But then later on in 48, when he changes, you can't see that change in network. But I tried really hard to show that change by making sure that he went to orange, because then he goes and follows Pompey. But the network...
Let's leave out the change. Maybe that was misleading. What I wanted, somehow I don't see in this network at all that, so for example, I don't see which people actually have the same opinion, or which people are actually from one family, or have the same social situation.
Okay, well, green is anybody who backs Caesar.
Yes, but this is the result that you want to get somehow, and you want to find out why are the people colored in the way they are. But the information that could lead to this information is just not there. Or maybe I don't understand something.
I think that the point is like, what connections are family based, and you don't see that.
No, you don't, and that's where probably, whereas you said those other connections between them needs to be accentuated. So there are families, and there are only certain types of families, and maybe this is because I went for an informal talk rather than a formal one, because it's in there somewhere. But so there are three major, well, there's more than three, but there are a couple of major families that are discussed. So there's the Macelli, who are all these three senators. Then there's the Ahenobarbei, which are the father and the son. Then you have the Sulpicius Rufus, the father and son. You have Cicero's own family. So there are families there. And this again is probably where you're right. If I wanted to talk more about that, then I should really have focused more about those connections. But they're really hard to pinpoint because we don't have letters from those family members. All we have is the fact that Caesar or Callius Rufus talks about them, and the fact that one backs one backs the other, or one's neutral and one backs Caesar or one backs Pompey. And maybe that is one of the pitfalls that I made, is that I didn't focus on the right things to discern those networks, and something that I should probably go back and, I said that, when I was creating this database, which goes on forever, especially 49, I probably should have changed the questions that I was asking and how I was analysing those letters, as opposed to just writing to, from, Caesar and Pompey. And I would probably have to go back and look at just family connections and how the Marcelli are connected and how they're discussed and so forth. And that would involve me probably going back and reading those letters again and just looking at just the families, rather than what I did, which was just going through the letters and seeing whether they're Pompey or Caesar. And to the extent that you see the networks, yes, the families could be more accentuated, and I probably would need to do that.
Would it actually help if you mark the connections, who mentions whom, with some additional information, such as if it's a positive or negative?
Well, there is. So in the identifier column is all of these things that, so if, Cicero mentions, Dolabella, so his son-in-law, in 49, he doesn't talk about him very positively, whereas in 48 and 47, he discusses him really, praising his spirits and saying the fact that he's going to help my family be safe and so forth. And that's all in the identifier column, but I couldn't find a way of bridging that into the actual network itself.
So the identifier is a node field that is just free text?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's me looking at a name and then a mention before or after the name about they're a friend, they're an ally. The one that Cicero writes about Cato, for example, is that Cato is dubious and not to be trusted. But he's in the same camp, so he supports Pompey as well in the end. But Gephi can't include just random text. So maybe I need to choose another software, or maybe I need to show that in a different way, because that is really important. But the software and all the different softwares that I looked at couldn't include that. I just wrote it for myself, but I couldn't find a way of incorporating it into it.
I have another question concerning the graphs. Does the length of an arrow or connection has any meaning? So the strength has a meaning, but
the length doesn't. No.
So that's it looks like having a meaning, like having dots closer to Cicero.
I know.
And by the way, probably it's just a technical way of displaying stuff. Yeah. But maybe there are also options just putting them all on a circular on the same distance.
Yeah. So if we have a look at Gephi, so see if the thing was going to work, but so I showed you a little bit about Gephi. So you input the database for the nodes, you input the database for the edges, and then you have all these different visualization tools that you can press, and some of them just make them all like a pinhead, and everything is very tiny. And Fruchtman, I can't remember what it's called. The visualization that I decided to use, Ruckman and Fruchtman, creates the best network in this software. And what I did with all of the years, because it just places the nodes randomly, all that matters in Gephi and in this particular visualization is the weight of the arrows, not the distance and so forth. So every single time I created a network map, it placed all these different people in all this anywhere. It didn't keep Pompey in the same spot. It didn't keep Caesar in the same spot. And sometimes the Caesar arrow was minuscule. It was like, a millimeter away from Cicero. What's the point of that? So you can move it. So I moved them all around. I made sure that Caesar was always in the same spot. Pompey was in the same spot. All of the main network connections were all in the same spot. So that's if somebody looked at it, they were looking for Rufus. Rufus is always there in the same spot. You don't have to go searching for him. But the software itself places them anywhere it wants to, which is another limitation. And the length of the arrows, yes, looks like it's really cool. Like Lentulus Cruz, for example, must be really close to Cicero because he's really close to him, whereas Pompey is really quite far away, so maybe that's insignificant, but no, that's just random. And I could have moved them, so I could have put Pompey really close to him, but then the arrow becomes really short and really fat, and yeah, and then you've got other names on top of it, and you can't see them, and so forth. So I just decided to place the significant people in the same spot in every single network map, so that was easier to read and easier to find and locate. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Did you try other software?
I did. I tried multiple types of software. I can't remember all their names. They're in here somewhere. Yeah, there's Superscape. There's let me see if I can find them. So there were about 10 different types of software that I tried, and there were some really famous ones. Now, where do I find page 2? There were some really famous ones, but every single one of them was limited. So and this is before I created the databases. I had to look first at networks and software and which one created the best type of networks, the best visualization, because sometimes they make really nice networks, but they can't be visualized properly, and it's really hard to read them, especially when there's lots of names. And so I played around with each single one of them. The really good thing is that they had examples of the different types of matrices they could create and different types of images they could create. So I had a look, and I had a look at the way that the information was inputted to make those diagrams and those maps. And Gephi was the only one that allowed me to put in all the different types of information that I wanted to get from the letters and have a look in a network map. So Gephi was the only one that allowed me to have this, to and from, show me, as well as show me different affiliations in terms of different colors and who they supported, as well as weighting the arrows so that I knew how many connections or how big the connection was between those two people. Sometimes you could only get one thing in one software package. You couldn't get all 3 or 4 of them into it. So I played for a very long time as to finding the right software package, and Gephi was the only one that really could incorporate as much as I wanted to into a network map, rather than just focus on one thing. So if I was just going to do the family connections, for example, I would probably use another software package. But I wanted to visualize, family, political, all of these different things into one network map, and Gephi was the only one that allowed me to do that. And that was free as well, without spending hundreds of pounds on something that I wasn't too sure would work in the end. So
I must ask Felix to stop me and to say, okay, let's now go to the beverage, because I have a lot of questions. But it is my job anyway. Let's start with material basis of your investigation. You said that you used an edition from 1911 of Cicero's letters, which was the only one to have the letters chronological. But in the end, you came up with a non-chronological view on the letters, unfortunately, which is anyway an argument for developing better software, as well as for network analysis, visualization, and as well contextualization within the time frameworks which you need as well. And I think there is still some need for us to have software that is flexible. As well, just as a comment, you used, or it seems to me that you used, although it is not opportune to tell this these days, you used close reading techniques, but you wanted to have something like a distant reading conclusions from the letters. Now, coming back to the question, which is the material basis of Cicero's letters. You already mentioned, okay, the letters were edited already right after Cicero's death in a special way to build up an historical person, let's say like this. But then, as well, how was the tradition of these letters until the 1911 edition? And as well, adding, is there any digital complete edition of Cicero's letters? And if there is none, why is there none? Which would have facilitated your work anyway.
Correct. So Cicero had a freeman called Tyro, depending on how you pronounce it, who worked very closely with him, did all of his work, wrote all his manuscripts and everything. And then when Cicero was murdered by Antony and his wife Fulvia, Tyro then spent the next couple of years putting all of his collection of treatises, works, speeches, and letters to be published by Atticus. So Cicero was already publishing things at the time when he was alive, so he was already publishing works. Atticus was already publishing some of his works, but not the letters. The letters were basically a private circulation between friends, family, and a lot of Roman letters were passed on from one person to the other. So there's a lot of discussion in the letters about the fact that, oh, have you read Caesar's letters to so-and-so? So Caesar or anybody would write to somebody knowing the letters would be distributed. And so there's a lot of discussion about the fact that, well, have you seen Pompey's letter written to Lentulus Cruz? Have you seen Caesar's letter that he wrote to me 5 weeks ago? I passed it on to so-and-so who was meant to pass it on to you. You know, so there's all of this. And a lot of these letters we don't unfortunately still have. All we have is the fact that we know that Caesar wrote to this person, and it's obviously quite a famous letter because 5 people talk about it, but we don't have that letter anymore. Which is really annoying because some of them sound really fascinating and some of them are really, really bitchy. And then after that, so Tyro publishes everything to make Cicero look better, to make sure that the main people end up looking good as well. In some cases, the people who are meant to look bad end up looking worse. And then through time, we have copies in the Middle Ages. We have Arabic copies of Cicero's letters. We have French monks, you know, in the 14th and 15th century copying out Cicero's letters, which then when you correlate back, when you come back to like the 17th century, when classicism is back and important again, you see that there are different interpretations of some letters in Arabic, in French, or in English, which are then compiled all together in the 18th century to make an appropriate version of the letters in English. And then the really famous ones are all, as I said, published in different sections. So there's whole books about letters to Atticus. There's whole books about letters to friends and family. And then Schoberg is the first one that puts it chronologically. And I chose him, even though you're right, I ended up making something that wasn't chronological because it wasn't possible. It was just easier for me to just read them in order. As to when they were written, when they were sent, when they were received, as opposed to going, oh, which one's next? Is it letter 16? Is it letter 17 to a friend? Letter 19 to Atticus? And having to search continuously. Schoberg is the only one that is the first one and the only one still to put them in chronological order. They have been digitized. By digitized, I don't, there's different terms for digitizing things, isn't there? There's really basic and there's really quite complex. There are obviously scanned editions of different books on Cicero's letters. So if you want to read the Gutenberg, for example, versions are all free online. So if you don't want to buy it or you just want to read one letter or one book, you go online and you find them. And they're all there, scanned. But it's very simple. You can't then click on which one comes next. It's just a scan of the book and that's it. It would be really great to have sort of a detailed digital copy of his letters, of one that has comments, one that has background information. So if there's a marker list that comes up, you can click on the name and it tells you who he is and how he's connected, but that involves a lot of work, and that would be amazing.
I would call this type of edition a scholarly digital edition.
But I think that's what everybody aims to, isn't it?
Yeah, but why isn't it done yet? One could apply to one and do this, because I think it would be valuable to have as well further investigations about, because one can ask so many questions on this corpus of material. And you always said, I would like to have had a chronological order and stuff like this. So the historical developments it's shown in the letters. Although we must say, okay, letters are edited already, and they are, let's say, 70%, 50%, maybe less original. The rest is editions. But you mentioned something other were quite interesting, because if you think about letter theories and theories about why the people were writing letters, we see in the 17th, 18th century, at least here in Germany, when the authors were writing themselves, they were always writing the letters to be published afterwards or to be circulated. And the modern classical theory of letters is you have a sender and you have a recipient, and this very simple model does not function really and cannot be applied neither to your letters. So we had as well in the antiquities or in Rome, and I believe as well in Greece, and if you look in other places as well there, we have always this purpose of writing a private letter to someone, with as well thinking about anyone else who is reading this letter. So there is a different type of privacy, and I'm thinking about it that it is very similar to today, because if you think about, for example, Twitter or social media, we are using Twitter or Facebook as a private thing. We are offering private information, but we are offering them to the public. So we are coming very near to what happened there. And as well, but what we don't getting is what you said in your examples. Although they were in war with each other, they were still respectful to each other. Today we are not in war on the social media with each other, but we don't have any respect for each other. So we have here the whole contrary.
It's really interesting you point that out, because there is a really marked difference in the way that the letters are written according to who they're addressed to. So the ones to Atticus, who is his best friend, are very informal. It starts off by, I wrote you yesterday, you didn't reply, why? Or I wrote you 3 letters yesterday, yet you only replied to 1. And then I did this, I went for a walk and then had a nap. That's very trivial, but they're kind of like that. But then the ones to Caesar and from Caesar are very, very formal. And you can tell that they're aimed at being spread, because it's Caesar, or oh wonderful Caesar, I am doing all of this because I have to, but I am trying my hardest to think about the possibility of joining you, but how can I do that with Pompey sitting right next to me? And so they're very, very formal. And there is almost nothing interesting in them, because it's all just how wonderful he is, how wonderful Caesar is, and you can't really discern anything from them, because you know that, oh God, he might pass it on to somebody, and I can't really say anything in them because, oh gosh, I might be shot, I might be killed for it. And even the ones from Caesar are very formal. It's like, Cicero, you're amazing. I really would love you to back me because I know how influential you are in the Senate and I know how important you are and blah, blah. And that's all that it says for about 3 pages. It's like, how important you are and I really wish you could back me. And it said like 16 different times. And then Atticus, he writes to Atticus 5 minutes later saying, oh, Caesar wrote me another letter. It was so boring.
Exactly how I write emails to my
So there is a marked difference between them, and that's something that is also very interesting, is that I think you get more from the letters that he writes to Atticus and to Rufus than he does from Caesar. Because Caesar is just basically all superfluous for about 3 pages, and at the end he says, oh, by the way, I would like this. And then ends it really quickly before we can say anything bad.
Yeah, but then again, a question to you as a mathematician: wouldn't there be mathematical models to filter, to cluster these letters? For example, the unimportant letters, where I'm asking myself, well, why have they been edited anyway? But to filter them and as well to get some more information with mathematical approaches out of these letters. We agree that we should have first scholarly editions of these letters, so your 250 letters might be but then we could think about mathematical algorithms too.
Oh, well, definitely, yeah. And I don't think, and this is where I think social network analysis and history or classics in general needs to really collaborate, because at the moment it's the new thing to use social network analysis in classics and history, and I've been talking to people at King's and they all think I'm mad because why would I want to do this? And then I tell them, well, there's only so many times I can read a text and analyze it for the 100th time that somebody a lot smarter than me has done 300 years ago. So you need to find something new now. You need to find something that is digital, something that is, maybe not digital, but something that can provide new insights. And I think social network analysis is great in some social sciences and does really well in some social sciences. And what we're doing in classics at the moment is we're trying to apply these things into classical studies where that wasn't its first intention. So I think what we need to do is we need to find a bridge of how to use things like social network analysis and how to really apply it to things like letters, to Cicero wrote amazing treatises on politics, on the gods, and so forth. How can we use modern things like social network analysis to get more information these days? Because we have all of these analytical tools and software and matrices and algorithms that haven't been designed yet, but can be designed. We just have to ask the right questions for them to be able to do what we want them to do. And one of the limitations from this project is the fact that if you use something that's just on a counter shop, it's just generic. Gephi is generic. It created what I wanted to ask. It couldn't really bring to life because the software is not there. And we have to have people that can bring to life what you want to visualize. So for my PhD, do I have to create the software? Maybe. Do I want to? No. Do I have to? Probably, because I want to do certain types of research, and Gephi or other software won't be able to do what I want it to do. I want to be able to identify patterns and connections between women in the late Republic. How do I do that? If the software doesn't allow me to, then I have to create the software. But that is a lot of work, which can I do in a PhD? I don't know.
Yeah. One problem I think is as well that we have parallel worlds between digital approaches in the social sciences, where social network analysis comes from, and digital humanities, where I would see as well the digital classicist as a field or as a main point of view. And these two worlds, you can see it if you look at the conferences in the two fields. They normally don't talk with each other. They are totally different approaches, and they should be strongly connected to each other. I would agree. One question which you already now partly answered, but only partly answered, is regarding your main theme of your thesis. How many names of these 250 names, maybe more or less, on the wall are women?
2. But the point of this exercise was not about women, because I could make it about women. Cicero mentions a lot of different women. And in fact, in the civil, the 50 to 47 BC, he does mention more than just 2 women, but they weren't relevant to this particular study. For what I want to do for my PhD, I want to create a hierarchy of just women. So you know how we currently have just a hierarchy of men? So you know, Caesar, Caesar's father, Caesar's grandfather, whatever. I wanted to be just women and how they're all connected. Not by reading Cicero's letters over that, mainly because there's not enough information about that. But will I use any of the people in here from Cicero's letters? Probably not, for my PhD. I might use them in terms of their family connections. So for a lot of these, especially the really important senators, we know who the women they were married to were, we know who their mothers were, we know who their daughters ended up being, who their daughters ended up marrying. So we can see a lot of family connections in terms of that aspect. But that is not from Cicero's letters. That is from prosopographic information. It is from funerary inscription. It is from, what else is it from? It's from the list of all the consuls that we have, knowing that these consuls then had children who became a consul 50 years later. That's who they were married to. They, certain family factions only married other families into other families. So we know that Metellus had to marry a Scipio or whatever. So therefore, there's only 5 Scipio women. So he had to be one of these 5 or whatever, So it's definitely not from things like Cicero's letters that will come from. But Cicero's letters are going to be important in identifying important people, but not in terms of identifying women and my PhD project. No. I just basically wanted to see if the software could do what I wanted it to, and I think we've discussed the fact that it didn't really. So. Yeah.
I think I have some more questions, but I think I will address them to you in the more private area without camera and with some beverages and something small to eat for every one of us. So thank you very much for having.
Thank you.
For talking to us, and thank you very much for attending. And I hope to see you soon, or to see you in 2 minutes there at the wine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.